So we're now on Daf Yud Omid Beis, and we're talking about a Ktana who's 3 years and a day, and she's Re'uya L'Bia, and she was Pareses Nida, and somebody had Be'ilu with her, and there's a din that a Boel Nida becomes an Av HaTuma, who's Metame Adam V'Kelim, and not only that, but in some ways, in Hilchas Tuva V'Tara, the Baal Nida has the status of a Zav. And that's what it says here on the top of Daf Yud Omid Beis, L'tami Mishkav Tachton Ke'elyon. Now, Tachton means when you have many different, let's say, mattresses, one on top of the other, and the Boel Nida, let's say, rests his body on the top matzah in Hebrew. The top mattress, we'll call it. So you have 10 mattresses piled up, and the Boel Nida never came in contact directly with any of the other mattresses, just with the top one, and yet all the mattresses are tameh, which is called Mishkav Tachton Ke'elyon Shel Zav. Elyon Shel Zav means a beged that was worn by a Zav or carried by a Zav. And in all these cases, we generate something called a Rishon L'tum. So we have an Av HaTuma that generates a Rishon L'tum. And a Rishon L'tuma is Metame Ochlin Umashkin, not Adam V'Kelim. Again, the din of the Nida herself is different. We're talking about the Boel Nida or a Zav. Because the Mishkav of a Nida is mamish like Avi Avos HaTuma, it's Metame even Adam V'Kelim. But in terms of Boel Nida, he has the status like a Zav, and a Zav will create a Beged as a Rishon L'tum, which is Metame Ochlin Umashkin. If this young girl, who's 3 years and a day, was married off by her father to a Kohen, is Ochelis B'Truma. She can already eat, like any Eishes Kohen who's Kinyan Kaspo, can eat Truma. V'im Bo'al Echad Mikol HaRayos, Sheba Torah, Mumasim Al Yada, V'hi P'tura. As we said before, Levado teaches me that the Boel, if he's a Gadol, will be Chayav Misa if she's an Erva. She's P'tura because she's only 3 years and a day. If, let's say, she had a relationship with Psulei Kol, like, for example, a Mamzer, or with a Nachri, a non-Jew, or even with a Kohen Cholol, in all those cases, Psola ben HaKuhuna, she becomes disqualified from marrying a Kohen, even at the tender age of 3 years and a day. She can never marry a Kohen. And as we said before, if she gets married to a Kohen, she can eat Truma. So now Rava is going to explain what he wants to prove from this din in Masechet Nida. Ktani Bia Uktani Nises. The Reish of the Mishnah says that this Ktana is Re'uyel is Kaddish B'Bia. And then in the next part of the Mishnah, it says Nises. So it seems that Bia is one of various methods of Erusin. And that's why Bia is in contrast with Nisuin. And Nisuin means that she was brought into the chuppah. I just want to make sure it's a Mishnah in Nida. Yeah, it's a Mishnah in Nida on Daf Mem Daf. So the Gemara now rejects Rava's proof. Hachi Kamar. This is what the Mishnah has in mind when it says in Nises. Ihani Nisuin Ochelis B'Truma. I'm sorry. Iahani Nesuin the Kohen, the Kohen is Ochelos B'Truma. That Kiddushay Bia, which is mentioned in the Reisha of the Mishnah Nida, is considered like Nesuin if it was a Kohen, and therefore she can eat Truma. Toshma, let's bring another raya from a brisa. Okay, now here we have to take a deep, deep breath because we get into the nuances of a kal v'chomer. The brisa records a shaklavitaria back and forth between Yochanan ben Bagbag and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Frasholach Yochanan ben Bagbag eitzel Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira l'nitziven. Shamati olecha shata omer sharusa bas Yisrael ocheles betruma. Now, presumably, what Yochanan heard in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was that if a bas Yisrael gets married only with Kiddushin to a Kohen, she can already eat Truma. Now, we're going to go through a long sugya here, but at the beginning of this sugya, the Gemara is going to analyze this in Doraisa terms. And Yochanan ben Bagbag is sort of like implying an accusation against Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Could you have possibly said that on a Doraisa level, a Bas Yisrael through Kiddushin could eat Truma when she gets married to a Kohen? However, I'm just giving previews of coming attractions. At the end of this sugya, the Gemara is going to try to divert it to a whole different mode of thinking, and we're talking about the Rabbanans. But in any event, now let's see what happens. Sholach lo. Rabbi Yehuda responds, you're wondering and amazed that I said that a Bas Yisrael, after Erison, can eat Truma if she's married to a Kohen. How could you doubt such a thing? I know that you're a great scholar and you know the entire Torah. Do you not know how to darshan a kal v'chomer? And now Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is going to formulate a kal v'chomer to prove that the arusa married to a Kohen can eat Truma. Now, it would seem that you don't have to be a baki b'chadrei Torah in order to set up this kal v'chomer that we're about to learn. But what's called a pircha, if you're not a baki b'kol Torah, then you don't know whether or not somewhere there's a pircha against the kal v'chomer. So when you establish kal v'chomer as solid ground, it must be that you're a baki b'chadrei Torah and you know that there's no pircha from left field. So let's see the kal v'chomer. Uma shivcha knanis. Okay, what do we have to know now about a shivcha knanis? You could be kona a shivcha knanis, or an eved knani for that matter, with kesef, with kinyan kesef. And that's derived from kinyan kaspa. However, bia is not meaningful to be kona shivcha. And even if the Kohen would be Baal El Hashem Ishus, it wouldn't have any impact because Ein Kiddushin Tosa B'Shivcha Knanis. So the kinyan that a Jew could make in a Shivcha Knanis is only through Kesef. Uma Shivcha Knanis She'ein Biyasa Machilosa Truma, Bia itself could not effectuate a kinyan. And therefore the Shivcha Knanis would eat Truma if she was acquired by a Kohen. Only if he acquired her through Kesef. And then she becomes Kinyan Kaspa. But Bia would not effectuate any sort of status. And certainly she cannot eat Truma. Because a Jew cannot be Kona Shivcha Knanis through Bia. But yet, Kaspa Machilosa Truma. If the Yisrael was kona the Shifcha Knanis through Kesef, then as we said before, we derive from a pasuk that Kinyan makes her into Kinyan Kaspo and she eats Truma. Okay, so which is greater? We see that Kesef is effective where Bia is not. And that's with regard to Shifcha Knanis. So here's the second part of the Kal V'chomer. Zu, in the case of a Jew who implements Erisin through Bia, and this Jew is a Kohen. So the law is that he's Kona her through Bia. And therefore she becomes Kinyan Kaspo, and therefore Machilosa B'Truma. Is Eno Din She Kaspo Machilosa B'Truma. If Bia is sufficient for her to eat Truma, then certainly Kesef should be enough to be Machel her Truma. Because we saw already in Shifcha Knanis that Kesef is superior to Bia, and where Bia would not clinch Achilas Truma, Kesef does. So if that's the case in Shifcha Knanis, well, in a regular case of an Arusas Kohen, where Bia certainly generates a status of Kinyan Kaspo to allow it to eat Truma, how much more so if Bia works that way, then how much more so Kesef? Because we said Kesef goes beyond Bia, and that we prove from Shifcha Knanis. Now Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira adds another point, that even though it's true that on a derisa level, the Arusa, through Kesef, married off to a Kohen, can now eat Truma, but Avoma Eseh Sharei Omu Chachamim Ein Arusa Bas Yisrael Ches B'Truma Tikonis L'Chuppah. We're going to see Ula that the Gzeres Chachamim was that if we allow an Arusa who's still living in her father's house to eat Truma, then all her relatives might be tempted to eat the Truma or drink the Truma wine, and that would be an Isur Misa B'Dei Shemayim of Zoros. Hechi Dami. The Gemara now wants to analyze Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira's Kal V'chomer with regard to Eishes Kohen. And keep in mind that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, as we said earlier, wants to derive from this Kal V'chomer that Kaspa Machilosa. So Hechi Dami. Let's go through various possible alternative scenarios to explain this Kal V'chomer. Ibibia Sha'al Yidei Kesef, if we're talking about Bia, Al Yidei Chuppah, that if there was both Bia and Chuppah, the Kesef Shal Yidei Chuppah, and there was both Kesef and Knisa L'Chuppah, that's impossible. Why? B'travayu Meichel Ochla. Even the Rabbanan, who prohibited an Arusa from eating Truma, because she's still living in a Beis Yisrael, would agree that after Nisu and after Chuppah, she eats Truma. So why did Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira say, "Al ma eseh amru chachamim ein arusa bas Yisrael achels b'truma shitikaris l'chuppah"? We're talking after Chuppah. Ella, therefore we have no choice but to assume another approach to this Kal V'chomer, and we're going to reject even the second approach. Ella b'bia sha'al yidei chuppah. We're talking about bia plus chuppah, the kesef shalal yidei chuppah. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was trying to analyze whether or not a woman who is niskadsha b'kesef, but she hasn't yet entered into the chuppah, can eat truma, and he's going to try to derive that from a kal v'chomer, from the fact that she eats truma after kiddushay bia. But that doesn't make sense because you're telling me that it was bia and chuppah. Is hachatarti hachachada? What kind of a kal v'chomer and logical, convincing argument could Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira put together and derive kesef without chuppah from bia with chuppah? Elalav, therefore, we only have, by process of elimination, we only have one possibility of interpreting the kal v'chomer of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. It's got to be bibia shalom yidei chuppah, because again, if it was after chuppah, then the Rabbanan would not prohibit her from eating truma. The kesef shalom yidei chuppah. Now we have, even Stephen. They're both on equal ground. There was no chuppah, and the kal v'chomer was to derive, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, that if he was mekadesh of a kesef, even though he has not brought her into the chuppah, she can already eat truma. And now we get to the raya, to our original suffix about whether bia eris and osa or nesuin osa. If you're going to tell me that bia's kiddushin jumps all the way to nesuin and generates nesuin, mishum hachi pshitale dialimale bia mikesef. Now we understand why it was pashut in the mindset of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that kiddushay bia are superior to kiddushay kesef, because with kiddushay bia she became a nesua, and there's no question that a nesua eats truma. But kesef does not make her into a nesua, but only into an arusa. So we see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira's kal v'chomer is established based on the assumption that kiddushay bia creates nesuin. Elaiyam, if you're going to say the opposite, that kiddushin osa, that bia could only create kiddushin and not nesuin, is ma'ishna hachad pshitale u'ma'ishna hachad mesafkale. In the kal v'chomer, Rabbi Yehuda assumes, as a dover pashut, that with kiddushay bia she eats truma, and he wants to derive kesef from a kal v'chomer. Well, guess what? If Rabbi Yehuda is absolutely convinced, and he doesn't need or feel compelling need to create a derivation and establish that kiddushay bia will be machal habitruma, then the same logic should apply to kesef. Why does he have a doubt with regard to kesef, for which he needs a kal v'chomer? He doesn't need a kal v'chomer. Both cases are case of an erison, and therefore one case is not more certain than the other. So from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira made this distinction between the two, we must assume that he held that bia could create kiddushin, that bia could create not only kiddushin, but also nesuin. And therefore, he assumed pshitole, that through bia, kiddushay bia, she can eat truma, and he wants to derive the ability for her, married to a Kohen, in kiddushay kesef to eat truma. And why was it so pashut to him that in bia, through kiddushay bia, she eats truma? That's because bia creates nesuin, and we never had a doubt that with nesuin she eats truma. So again, just to summarize, the bottom line is that the Gemara is only able to make sense out of this kal v'chomer of Yehuda ben Beseira if we assume bia without chuppah. And therefore, bia without chuppah, if I hold nisuin also, that's why it was pshita to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira in the case of bia that she eats truma, because it jumps all the way to a full-fledged nisua. Comes along Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and he rejects this proof. I'm going to go back to our original position that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about bia she'al yidei chuppah and kesef she'lo yidei chuppah. And then you told me, well, how can he derive kesef she'lo yidei chuppah from bia al yidei chuppah? It's not a fair comparison, because in the case of bia, which is the basis of this kal v'chomer, there was also chuppah, Whereas in the case of Kesef, there was no chuppah. It's kal v'chomer bia isa. Rav Nachbar Yitzchak argues that there still is a kal v'chomer hachi shalcha, and this is the kal v'chomer that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira sent as a response to Rabbi Yochanan ben Ban. Uma shivcha knanis she'ein bi'asa machilosa b'truma filu al yidei chuppah. Right, as we said before, if a Kohen would have bia with a shivcha knanis, he's not kona because there's no Kiddushin tofsin, and certainly she cannot eat truma. She's not kinyan kaspa. And that would apply even if after bia he took her into a chuppah. All that would be fictitious, who would have no validity or efficacy in halacha. So even if he was baal out this Kohen and he brought her into the chuppah, she still would not be permitted to eat truma because ain't tofsin ba Kiddushin, and certainly ain't tofsin ba nesuin. So she's not kinyan kaspa, and nevertheless kaspa machilasa below chuppah. So that bia cannot be machila even if there was both bia and chuppah. Kesef is machilasa even without chuppah. So that sets up the kal v'chomer for the case of Arusas Kohen, because we see how much more powerful it is for kinyan kesef to be machil b'truma. Is zo, how much more so in the case of an Arusas Kohen should be also machilasa b'truma, at least al yidei chuppah. You have to grant me that after chuppah, if there's bia plus chuppah, she eats truma. Is a nudin shekaspa machilasa b'truma below chuppah. What happened here? Below chuppah. This is like a dive. What do you mean below chuppah? You want to derive a kal v'chomer from bia to kesef, and you're talking about bia with chuppah. How can you derive any conclusions and prove anything for kesef without chuppah? So here we have a sefer called the Atzmos Yosef from the Pri Megadim. And he says the following, that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is really changing the entire focus of this kal v'chomer. In what sense? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is postulating that the kal v'chomer of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is not from Kiddushay Kesef. I'm sorry, from Kiddushay Bia to Kiddushay Kesef, but rather in the language of the Atzmos Yosef, who dan es ha'isha ha'miskadeshes. So we're going to compare Shivcha to Isha, and we're going to set up a kal v'chomer. In Shivcha, we saw that Kesef is more powerful than Bia. And not only that, Kesef is more powerful in Shivcha than Bia with Chuppah. Because Kesef alone is enough to be machil the Shivcha Knanis Truma as Kinyan Kaspa. But Bia, even if integrated with a subsequent Chuppah, could not be machil her because ein Kiddushin ve'ein Nesuin Tofsin b'Shivcha Knanis. Is therefore, let's go from Shivcha and jump to Isha. In the case of Isha, her be'ilah is machil ha truma, at least, you got to grant me with chuppah, how much more so the kesef could be machil ha truma. And that means kesef even without chuppah, because we've already proven from Shivcha Knanis that that kesef could be kona and machil b'truma, where bia cannot, even bia with chuppah. So if, in the case of a Kohen who first of all did bias erison and then he took her into the chuppah, certainly she could eat truma, then how much more so kesef is operative and valid to generate a heter achilas truma even without chuppah. Amolma Esa says Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Sharei Omru the Chacham made a takana Ein Arusa Bas Yisrael Ochelis B'Truma after Eretz Not Shetikonis L'Chuppah Mishum Ula, because we're always afraid that she'll feed the members of our family, and she's only in Arusa, she's in Beis Avia, and they're not Kohen. So it comes out that according to this new interpretation of the Kavachomer of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, there's no proof that Bias Kiddushin even generates Nisuin. Because even if you were to argue that Bias Kiddushin or Erusin is only powerful enough to effectuate Erusin, nevertheless you still can interpret that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was referring to Bia together with Chuppah. And we still made sense out of the Kavachom. So the Gemara now asks, "U Ben Bagbag?" Ben Bagbag apparently rejects the Kavachomer of Yehuda ben Beseira, and he holds that you cannot compare the kinyan of an Isha to the kinyan of a Shivcha. Why is that? Why does he undermine the whole basis of the Kavachomer? And the Gemara says, Gabi Shivcha Knas Lo Shir B'Kinyana Hocha Shir B'Kinyana. In the case of Shivcha Knanis, once he's kona her with Kesef, she becomes his Shivcha L'Chol Dover. The Kinyan is not lacking in anything. And therefore that Kinyan, since it's a complete 100% Kinyan, without any restrictions, any limitations, therefore could be Machal B'Truma. But in the case of Isha, we know that Shir B'Kinyana, because with Kiddushin of Kesef, he only makes her into an Arusa, and she doesn't become Ishto L'Chol Dover until after Nisuin. So the Kinyan of Kesef in Isha is incomplete. And therefore, that Kinyan is not enough to be Machal HaBetruma. And now we get to Ravina. Ravina wants to go back and interpret the Brisa of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira as addressing the case of Bia and Kiddushin without Chuppah. And then we ask the question, if that be the case, if both Bia without Chuppah and Kesef without Chuppah create Erusin and not Nisuin, so why was Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira working hard to prove Kesef, and he assumed as a Dover Pashut that Bia certainly is Machal HaBetruma? What's the difference between Bia and Kesef? In both cases, they only generate Erusin because there was no Chuppah. So Ravina now takes us on an entirely different path. And the back and forwards here, back and forth between Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira and Ben Bagmag was only about Durabanas on Yochanan ben Bagmag. Midaraisa Mifshet Pshita lay, even Yochanan ben Bagmag understood as the Pash, the Achla, the Arusa could eat Truma because she's an Arusas Kohen. So what was the back and forth here? Sakravina this is what Yochanan ben Bagbag was sending to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Shamati alecha shata omer halach lemaisa arusa bas Yisrael ochels b'truma. I heard that you are not choshesh. What does it mean? Lo chayshta l'simpa. Maybe the Baal will find a moon, which he didn't know about. He's a Kohen. And the Kiddushin were Kiddushin tos. Wake up. Smell the coffee. Look, she's a Baalas moon. So now he's mafkia lemafreya the Kiddushin, and she's been eating truma as a zar. Aren't you worried about that? Shalach le Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said to Ben Bagbag, I also know that she can't eat truma as an arusa, minarabonon. V'yata iyata omer came mufsakayim b'chosh etabaki b'chadri etorah lidus kavachomi ata yodea. Uma shivcha knanis. She'ein biyasa machilosa b'truma. The biyas going to a shivcha knanis cannot be machil truma. And nevertheless, kaspa machilosa b'truma v'lo chayshina l'simpon. Maybe the Kohen will discover a simpon in the Shivcha Knanis. And nobody doubts that the Shivcha Knanis is allowed to eat Truma, even though he purchased her and acquired her with Kesed. And guess what? He's going to find out that there's a move, and that's going to be Mavatos Kinyul Mafreya. And yet, Talach is that she can eat Truma. So, in the case of an Arusas Kohen, Shebi Asa Machilosa B'Truma and it didn't Shekaspa Machilosa B'Truma. In the case of an Arusas Kohen, Kiddushay Bi of a Kohen is Machil HaTruma. So certainly Kiddushay Kesef should be Machil HaTruma. Why aren't we Choshish for Simpa? Which would be Mavatal Kiddushay Mafreya, and she's a Zar. So basically, logically, the Kal V'chomer teaches us that we're not Choshish for Simpa. And therefore, Yochanan and Bagbag, you're making a big mistake. But, says Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Tachlis, Halach L'maisa, I agree with you, that after Erison, she cannot eat Truma. Ma'aseh, Shrei Omu Chachamim, Arusas Bas Yisrael, Eino Chelas B'Truma. And here we turn to Daf Yud Aleph. We're worried about the probability that she may feed her brothers or sisters or father a kos of truma, and there's zarin. So we see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira also agrees to the final halach l'maisa of Yochanan ben Bagbag that with Erison she cannot eat truma. And we'll add a little bit more before we end. How are we doing on the clock? Ooh, not too good. Uben Bagbag, why does he reject the Kal V'chomer of Yehuda ben Beseira? Because simpon ba'avodim lesle. He holds that there's no mitzius of, and therefore no chashash, that he might, the Kona, the Baal, the Adon, who was Kona, the Eved, or the Shivcha, would find a mum. Why? If this is an open mum, let's say he's missing a finger or something, then he certainly checked him out and he bought him anyway. So obviously he doesn't care about the mum. But the mum and Shabbaseser, if there was some sort of hidden mum and he wasn't aware of it when he purchased the shivcha, then my nafkale mina. Why does he give a hoot about a mum? L'malacha kaboyle. He only needs the eved or the shivcha for malacha. So what difference does it make? If the mum does not prevent her from doing malacha, he should be perfectly satisfied. So there's no chashash that the kinyan will be batal mafreya. Nimsa Ganov, or maybe you'll say, well, you know what? He purchased this Eved and he finds out that the Eved is a Ganov or Kaviyustas, or he is a kidnapper. Is he Gio? You know what? He cannot back out of the deal and be Mvatel the Mecca because Stam Avodim HaGanovim, and yet you bought an Eved. My Amrid, but you'll say, wait a minute, I didn't know that he was a listed Mizuya, and that far he wasn't Choshesh. He says here, Mapkam Acher Tomar Sheyochol Lios Bi Evet Sheyiton Alokech Levatel. Oh, now he's going to say, but he's a listed Mizuya. Or Nichtav Malchus, or he violated some sort of crime against the government, and they're going to put him to death when they catch up with him. So he says, Hanakola Islu. He knew about it because the rumor has it It flies like the wing of an eagle. And he knew that this Eved was wanted dead or alive. And yet he went ahead and he bought it. We're not going to believe him that said that he claims that he was deliberately misled and he didn't know about it. So therefore, immediately with the Kinyan, the Eved becomes his Eved and he can eat Truma. But in the case of an Isha, there's a din of Simpon, and he can be vatal the Kiddushin because he finds out that she has a mum, and therefore he has to be Choshesh, that would be Mafkia, the Kiddushin L'Mafreya, and as a Zar, she was eating Truma. Frek the Gemara, Michti Bein Lamar, Lo Ochla, My Benayu. It comes out that whether you hold like Rav Yehuda ben Beseira or you hold like Yochanan ben Bagbag, Midrabanan she cannot eat Truma. According to Rav Yehuda ben Beseira, because the Chash of Ula. According to Rav Yochanan ben Bagbag, because the Chash of Simpa. So my Benayu, Ika Benayu, Kibel, Mosar v'Holach. 3 nafkaminas. First nafkamina is if the Baal made a statement that whatever mum she has, and I might discover, I still want to marry her, and I'm being Makadish al Das that maybe she'll have a mum. So in that case, there's no Chash Simpa, because even if we find a mum, there's no Bittul Kiddushin. But there's still a Chash that as long as she's living in her father's house, she might be Machal Lem Truma. Number 2, the father gave over his daughter to a Shliach of the Baal. That's called Mosar. And therefore, since there was no Knisa, then we have to be Choshesh for Simple. But we're not going to be Choshesh for Ula of Shem Yarichelu because she already left her father's house. And finally, V'holach, even if Holchu Shluchei Av, Im Shluchei Baal, so there was never a Knisa L'chuppah, nevertheless, we're not going to be Choshesh that she'll feed her brother's Truma, because she already left the rishus of her father. But yet we still have a chash. Maybe he'll find out that she's a balas mum, and he'll be mavato the Kiddushin L'Mafreya. And if she eats truma, it turns out that she was a zara that eats truma. Okay, then this is where we're going to stop here on Daf Yud Aleph. And Amir Hashem, if it works out for you, same time, same station.